Welcome, scholars. This is lesson 6 3.3 Technology and Exploration. Because technology drives so much of what happens around the world, not just now, but also in the past. So let's see how technology drove the age of exploration. But let's see where we were before the technology of exploration reached Europe. Ancient navigation. For thousands of years, the Europeans had been making seagoing vessels, boats to go into the water. But these seagoing vessels had been narrow, open boats called galleys, nothing like what would hit in the age of exploration. These were long, narrow boats. Now, the galleys themselves were moved primarily by slave labor. The slave labor would sit on the deck or below the deck and row these giant oars in order to make the boat move. They had sails, but they could really only use the sails when the wind was just right and really helping to push them where they were going. The sails were secondary. The oars were how these boats moved. An additional problem of the galley was because of its size and its design, they were not good. They were not stable in ocean travel. A galley facing waves such as these would easily tip over. Ocean going travel was pretty much off limits. And even in the seas, it was very difficult. The Mediterranean Sea, the galleys would stay as close to shore as they possibly could. And if there was even a hint of bad weather, those galleys would head toward shore. They could not manage the larger waves. That and the additional problem of needing a tremendous number of oarsmen meant that after the Black Death hit, galleys became really difficult to maintain and to man. You didn't have enough people. The Black Death had wiped them out. So this really hit trade, and it made those galleys a very difficult ship to work with. Well, along comes the Portuguese and the caravel. In the 1400s, Portugal is going to get together some people, and Prince Henry the Navigator, this fellow right here, is going to get credit for the invention of the caravel, a new boat that will propel Europe into the age of exploration. Now, as a direct result of his work, it's worth noting Prince Henry was a third-born son, never becomes a king, was always just a prince, but he wanted to make his mark in the world. And he figured out early on that this was a way to do it. And he gathered together all of Europe's best navigators. He got scientists, boat builders, captains from around the world to come to Portugal because they knew that he was interested and he wanted to make something special happen. And so Prince Henry got these people together and, well, I would say he made a boat. They made the boat. But they made the boat because he was able to get all the best minds together in one place. Now, once the caravel itself was built, they had a smaller, faster, more maneuverable ship that actually held more cargo than a galley. It's smaller, so it takes fewer resources to build. It's faster, which is incredibly helpful both in trade and in combat. That maneuverability is going to mean that it can avoid rocks and whatnot in the water that it might hit, but also help in battle. And because you don't have to carry all those oarsmen and all the food and water that they would need to sustain them, you'd have a much smaller crew and therefore carry more cargo. It was a very, very good ship for trade. And once you weaponized it, once you put these cannons on it, and you've got a small ship that's a difficult target, that is fast, can outrun its opponents, it's more maneuverable, so it can position itself where it wants to be when fighting. Well, it simply dominates these larger galleys. The galleys cannot and do not stand up well against caravels. So the caravel is a tremendous trade advantage and military advantage. And the Portuguese are really going to take advantage of it for as long as they can. Now, world geography. Let's take a moment to see what's happening in this realm. See, great strides are being happening in navigation. This is coming out of the schools in Portugal that Prince Henry's put together. But cartography is getting better as well. It's going to be a very important thing that the world, that the explorers in Portugal learn about the world because they knew so little about it. Prior to exploration, again, these are some of the best maps of the world at the time. Europe is pretty well detailed, and as is the East in parts. But Africa, they have no idea. They have no idea. And the map kind of reflects the fact that they have no idea what's going on. They need to learn more about the world. One of the ways they do that is by actually learning more about what they had already in the past known. The Greeks and the Romans had known more about navigation than these societies that existed 1,000 years later. And that was because of great mathematicians like Ptolemy. And Ptolemy's work was very important for the Europeans to know and to understand in order to advance navigation. And they're only going to gain access to this because Islamic civilization has been much more stable and has held on to a lot of this knowledge. So as it was lost in Europe, Islamic civilizations held on to it. And now Arab scholars are reteaching Europe about the work of Ptolemy. So Ptolemy and Europe get reintroduced. And this is key because without his work, they couldn't have moved forward. Now, what was so key about it is the idea of latitude and longitude. The idea that these distances could be calculated and calculated accurately. If you wanted to know where to go, you had to know where you were and where that other place was in relation to you. You had to have a reasonable way to estimate how far away something else was. And along the way, you need to be able to make sure that you were on track, that you were indeed heading in the right direction. Without the ability to do that, which Ptolemy's work had developed, and these people working under Prince Henry are going to expand, then you can't explore the world. It just can't be done. However, there are problems with it. One of those problems, a very notable problem, is the idea that the distance of a mile was not always accurately calculated. An Arab mile is different than a European mile, which was different from a mile in China. It was a very imperfect way to measure it. It caused confusion, and it gave you an approximate, but sometimes the approximate distances would get very far off. Columbus had this problem. When Christopher Columbus was estimating how long it would take to sail from Portugal to India, he way underestimated the size of the world, partially because he was mixing calculations on the distance of a mile in a way that best favored his voyage, but did not actually reflect reality. This was a serious problem that took a little while to correct. One example is simply the idea of a foot, right? How long is a foot? Well, a mile is 5,280 feet. Whose foot are we measuring? It could be vastly different depending on what you think a foot is. That's just one funny little example. There were lots of other problems with the calculations that came into play. So let's look at some of the other technology. We have the compass and the astrolabe. The compass and the astrolabe are very key to ocean travel. Especially when you can't see the land, you can't follow the shore, as will happen. You need to have these tools. Now, the magnetic compass is a Chinese invention, and it's going to reach Europe through Arab merchants. Arab merchants are going to be traveling on their boats using compasses. Europeans will see those, say, hey, what's one of those? Buy a few from the Arabs and learn about this technology and how you can tell direction out at sea. It helps sailors determine their direction. Without that compass, especially if you've got cloudy weather, overcast weather, and you can't see the sun, you don't necessarily know where you're going, and you could wind up in completely the wrong place, like these poor ice-bound sailors who headed in the wrong way. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Now, the astrolabe is this invention here. This is a more modern version of it, but it's a Greek invention that was perfected by the Arabs. And again, Europeans generally forgot that this invention existed until it was reintroduced from those Arab merchants. And with the astrolabe, which looked more like this at the time, sailors could determine their distance north or south of the equator. So you could know how far north or south you were, and that can help you with if you sail out to sea when you're supposed to cut back toward land to land where you want to be. Without that knowledge, who knows? When you finally came back from sailing out to sea and you hit land, were you north of your destination or were you south of your destination? Where were you? How would you get there? You didn't know unless you had an astrolabe. Key technological advances. You can't have the age of exploration without them. Like the compass and this better astrolabe, though, other things were needed, and Europeans are going to need to get their hands on it. A lot of these were borrowed. An example is the Sternpost Rudder. This piece that goes into a back of a boat right there, that's going to help you steer the boat. Without a sternpost rudder, you need oarsmen. And as we know, these caravel don't have oarsmen. You're not going to be directing ships in that way. So how are you going to make the ship turn and turn quickly? The sternpost rudder. And they get this from Chinese. Additionally, we've got lateen sails. This cut in the sail and how it's hung from your mast means that your ship can actually sail against the wind. You do that by following kind of a zigzag pattern through the water. But in those older ships, on those galleys, you had that one fixed sail. And if the wind wasn't directly behind you, blowing directly where you want to go, your sails were next to useless. This lateen sail gives a lot more flexibility, allows you to use your sails as your primary mode of moving through the water. Actually, in these ships, it was your only mode of moving through the water. So you needed to have a good, solid lateen sail. Mostly, the Portuguese are not inventing these things. They're putting these different ideas together and creating a new ship. And the only reason they were able to do that is because we have Chinese technology and European technology preserved by Arab societies, all mixing in this Indian Ocean community, and then Europeans getting exposure to that when they try to trade with Arabs. Without the Silk Road, which was, again, more than just the spread of goods, it was the spread of knowledge and ideas and technology. And without that Silk Road, we don't have the age of exploration. This is why I keep coming back to the Silk Road and why I will not give up on coming back to the Silk Road for a little while still, because it was so important to world history. Well, that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.